Welcome to Cedar's Compass, where we explore the dynamic interplay between our inner landscape and our planet's ecology. Delve deep into the worlds of science, medicine, and philosophy as we discover the threads that weave us into the larger tapestry of life on Earth. Our first one of these monthly offerings that I'm just wanting to put out there. I think this was inspired for me by doing some question and answers with other people, just on other platforms, and just having really great response, and people coming up with lots of questions and being able to just field things. And then oftentimes what happens is someone will get inspired to answer a question, et cetera. And so it just sort of links us all together in this nice sort of fluid dialogue about all things medicine, cancer, chronic disease, traditional Chinese medicine, Taoist thought, etc. And so this is part of the monthly membership for people that are interested in jumping in and being a part of our community. Our online offerings, you probably have seen, I've been doing a lot of work pumping out material onto the platforms, especially Instagram, but Facebook also, and then also doing some material that's coming out both on the website and then through my monthly, like even more frequent than that, I guess these days, more like every 2 weeks, newsletters, just keeping everybody up to speed on what's going on and what we have as far as offerings go. So that's what this is about. And I'm just coming off of a 4-day Qigong retreat here out in Williams, Oregon, with my dear friend and another TCM doc, Kyle Shinners, who has been studying with a grandmaster in the Dohan system for many years, and also with another dear friend and colleague, Chris Chen. And so the three of us taught a weekend workshop on the Dohan system of Qigong and just deep into traditional Chinese medicine thought. And it was really beautiful. It was a beautiful piece of land, a lot of people. It was just a really amazing experience. And so we're just literally just coming off of that today. And so sorry if we're a little bit behind and just getting to things. But in any case, I'm really glad to see some of you here. I don't have anybody here, on the talk function. You all are muted right now. And so I can unmute you as we go. If you have questions, you're going to want to jump into the chat function on your control panel and just go into the chat, and you can send a message. I've got Jack Sabrini here with me. He's been helping me produce a lot of material, and he'll be here to help us get the questions organized and answer any questions that come up for you. So feel free to send any questions you have as a chat. And we can also open it up. I can open up the conversation and unmute you if you have a question or you want to raise your hand or put something in the chat. So, but the point of this was to have people, send in questions beforehand. And obviously we'll get a good flow going with this over time. This is the first one, so we're just kind of working out the bugs and such. But feel free to ask questions, and then we can start to get into a flow of questions and answers. I had a few things come in earlier, a few emails and such came in with questions on them. And so I thought I would start with those questions and just kind of go through them first. I'm just trying to wonder if I can see who all is here. Let's see. I'm not sure if I have all those people here, but in any case, what I'll do is I'm going to go, I've got a Google Doc here with the questions on it next to me, and I can go through and we can answer the questions that were already sent in. Also, this will be recorded, so we'll have this as part of our kind of ongoing growing ecosystem of materials for everybody to have access to. So any questions that you have will be, archived for us as answers that we can look up and continue to evolve over time. I'll say one thing, that the answers to questions, especially today in modern medicine, they're ever evolving answers. Sometimes when we go back to more of the deeper roots of Taoist medicine and traditional Chinese medicine, a lot of the answers that we find are rooted in this tradition and this base of knowledge and wisdom that supports consistency about perspective on medical conditions and on health in general. And that's really because it's coming from a principle-based perspective, not one that's dependent on evolving medical information discoveries at the microscopic level. It's more based on long-term observations of the movement of natural cycles and such. So anyway, that's just a little bit about this kind of information. So I'm going to go ahead and start here with the first question. And the first question came in this morning and was this. The question is, good morning. I was wondering if you believe and incorporate the information of cancer expert Thomas Seyfried and your opinion on the ketone diet and fasting to starve cancer. So the Thomas Seyfried, he's one of these thinkers of mind in cancer, the cancer world. He's done a lot of work in especially looking at what was called the metabolic theory of cancer. And the metabolic theory of cancer is really all around, how cancer is a metabolic disease. And from my perspective, it's definitely a metabolic disease. It's not solely a metabolic disease, but it is a disease that's characterized by changes in metabolism. And just to, sort of elaborate a little bit on what metabolism is, in this context, most of what we're talking about is taking substances from the environment, things that we take in, metabolizing them, that is changing them and breaking them down into other components so that we can use those as fuels or to store them or to use them as building blocks for the creation of structures, etc. And metabolism is a very big and complex subject. And when we get into the microbiota that I've been hitting a lot lately, and the kind of offerings that we've been putting out on Instagram and in other places on the website and through the newsletter, it's been a lot of focus for us recently because the microbiota make up something called the metabolome, which includes the way that the microbiota interact with what we take in, especially the digestive tract, but then also how we then take those materials and further metabolize them to create substances that are absorbable in the body, assimilable into the tissues, and able to integrate for us. At the level of the cell, in terms of metabolism, the primary mechanism that we look at in biology and that we study a lot is the cellular respiration pathway. And we all talk about respiration as this process of breathing in air, which is rich in oxygen, which then we bring in through the alveoli, those little structures that create a lot of surface area inside of our lungs, that then interacts with these microcapillaries that contain our blood. And this, of course, the blood is then coming from the right side of the heart, right, to be brought into the lungs while it's depleted of oxygen, so that the hemoglobin is there as a electromagnetic holding material that binds to the oxygen and then creates oxygenated hemoglobin that then moves around the body and it distributes that oxygen to our cells and tissues, right? Well, when that oxygen gets to our cells and tissues, then we have cellular respiration that takes place. And cellular respiration is the way that our cells take that oxygen and turn it into energy. So basically what we do is we burn fuels in the presence of oxygen to create energy, right? That's what our cells do. And of course, we can do that in the presence of an oxygen depleted environment, which we would call a hypoxic environment. And in hypoxia, what we do is we ferment the fuel, primarily sugar in this context. We run something called glycolysis, where we just basically turn sugars into ATP, energy, really in a short form, in order to generate energy when there's not enough oxygen. This is a big thing when it comes to cancer because there's this anaerobic process in cancer where we kind of look at cancer as being oftentimes a disease that is more likely to run an anaerobic process, one that's going to be a shorter cycle of generation of ATP, that currency of energy, in order to generate a lot of rapid growth and energetic production so that it can drive its process of uncontrolled growth. So Seyfried's idea is that the metabolic theory is that, hey, cancers are going to be really fueled by sugar, and they're going to oftentimes run this glycolysis system and run it fast, so that they're relying on this fermentation process and they're not able to produce energy using oxygen. But that theory isn't actually the whole story. And a lot of cancers actually use aerobic fermentation, where they actually use the glycolysis in the presence of oxygen to create energy. And we've found now that what cancers often do in order to preserve the molecules, the proteins, the structural components, we would call them the purines, the RNA and the DNA, the materials that it needs to gather in order to replicate itself and make new cells. It wants to conserve those materials. And so what it does is it pushes this glycolysis process more so that you actually create energy faster with a lot of byproduct, and lactic acid being the primary byproduct of that glycolysis cycle. Then the lactic acid actually has all these effects. It drives further hypoxia. It also inhibits immune function, and it strengthens this fibrotic web that gets developed by the fibroblasts and the platelets, other tumor-associated cells that then develop sort of a network around the cancer where it's protecting itself from the outer environment, which is us, which is the immune system, and all the processes that would break down the cancer in our body. So that step, that glycolysis step in our cells, is actually the first part of a bigger process called oxidative phosphorylation, the Krebs cycle, right? And the electron transport chain. If you've studied biology, then I'm sure you're probably really aware of this, and probably most of you are familiar with this idea. And it's a really elegant, beautiful energy generation system that takes a small amount of fuel and turns it into a lot of ATP. The idea is that you put in one molecule of glucose and you get 36 or 38 molecules of ATP. You use a little bit along the way, but you gain a big net. Whereas in the glycolysis, that first little cycle, it only gives you 2 molecules of ATP for that same cost, that sugar cost that comes in. So there's this idea that cancer is really a metabolic disease that's driven by this glycolysis process, and that we could alter the course of it by changing the fuel. And so one of Thomas Seyfried's big promotions is to use the ketogenic diet, right, which is a diet that's very rich in fats, in order to make it hard for cancer to do what it likes to do, which is take fuels and use them in this anaerobic cycle to make energy. So you're kind of pushing against that, because fats as a fuel are actually very clean for our body. We take fats and we actually cut them through this thing called beta oxidation. We cut them into these little beta units, and those are basically pyruvic acid, which is the starting point for driving the Krebs cycle. So it's really clean. And there's been a lot of cancers that have done well with ketogenic diet, but what we've seen in the data more recently is that a lot of cancers will, under the environmental pressure of a shift from a carbohydrate-rich, fuel-rich environment to a more fat-rich environment, they'll actually shift the way that they use energy, and they'll become adapted to that fat oxidation process. And so then cancers can hijack that step, and they can become competent even in this fat-rich ecosystem. So it's not a simple thing. And again, I think it's really important for us to realize that there's never a silver bullet for cancer. There's no one type of cancer. There's no answer to cancer. There are cancers that exist in people's bodies at a specific moment in time, and you need to be able to identify what's happening for that person. And this is where the observational stuff of the Chinese medicine, what kind of a constitution does this person have? And then what are the things that are likely, the fuels that are present, the pathogenic factors that are present in their body? It's oftentimes not just glucose excess, but it's insulin too. And then the insulin-like growth factors that are all big drivers for the promotion of cancer to do its work, to continually make new energy and new cells. So the thing with Thomas's work is that it's part of the picture. And the initial theory was called the Warburg effect. The Warburg effect was this idea that cancers would go into this aerobic state, this glycolysis, depleting the oxygen, and then they would become this anaerobic kind of entity. But what we saw is that there's actually a reverse Warburg effect that comes out later, where the cancer actually takes the byproduct from the initial metabolic shift and starts to create these cells that are actually driving oxidative phosphorylation, that same elegant system that we use. And these cancer cells are conserved inside the tumor. And so the cells that are, digesting the sugar and creating the lactic acid then use the lactic acid as a fuel for these inner cells that take the lactic acid and turn it into pyruvate and then make themselves grow in this other way to make energy in a more efficient way. So again, it's very complex. It's not so simple. And we don't want to oversimplify our concept of cancer or how to treat it. And so, with brain tumors, ketogenic diet is generally thought of as a really helpful thing. But even in the data there's some cancers in like glioblastomas that have shifted to a ketogenic competent cell type. So we want to be careful. And what I often do with folks is we'll do a cycling where we'll cycle on to a ketogenic diet for a few days and then shift into a more modified paleo type of diet, which is the diet that I normally promote with most people. It's definitely a plant-based diet, which is primarily, vegetables and all the plants rich in polyphenols, but then also some fats and proteins that are all really clean, where you're cutting out most of the carbohydrates, all the simple carbohydrates and things, but you're really continuing to get a lot of those plant compounds in, not going full ketogenic. Do that for 3 days. And then you might fast for a day. And I do a lot of intermittent fasting with folks too. And then there's a big piece around fasting around chemotherapy, where if you're getting chemotherapy, you want to put people into a fasting-like state, because then their cells go out of the energy production system and they go into a resting phase. Whereas the cancer cells are still growing, trying to suck up whatever fuel they can. They become a bigger target for the chemotherapies, which are actually damaging the DNA of dividing cells. The mechanism is not just to kill all the cells, it's to kill the dividing cells. That's what those drugs do. So I'm not going to go too much deeper into that. I'm sure there's more that we could go into on that. And I'm sure that brings up other questions for folks. But that, at least there's a first answer to open that topic, and we can get into, a deeper discussion on it over time. And if anybody has anything specific they want to ask about that, or if they feel like there's something they want to correct, please send out a chat, to the group, and then we can, dig into it a little bit more. Cool. So then the second question that came in today was, I've had occasion to smoke cigarettes a few times over the past year to cheat, returning to being a non-practicing smoker immediately afterward. I'm smoking about 10 cigarettes a day for a week at a time, 2 or 3 times a year. This seems to satisfy my desire to be bad and give me something to look forward to, a treat, you might say. My question is, how dangerous do you think this is for me? My wife is concerned about the possible health impact of this. And so to answer that question, one of the most important concepts that we have been, talking about in a lot of my work lately is the concept of hormesis. And the simple way to talk about hormesis is to think about how something that doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? And that's again a simplification of this idea, but it is an important one. And that simple analogy works well, because under the influence of stress in our bodies, we adapt to the stress. We learn, we build mechanisms, we build machinery to deal with the stresses that we're facing, and we get better at dealing with it. We're already well primed. We're built to face radiation because we are living in a solar system on a planet with the sun, with stars, with the earth that's radiating. There's always a little bit of radiation affecting us. And because of that, we have these really powerful quenching tools that quench radioactive, gamma ionizing materials, and we turn them off, we neutralize them. And so we're constantly going through this process of facing new stresses and neutralizing those stresses. And as we do that, getting better. But there's a point at which hormesis, which is a strengthening process, right? If you took a graph and you said, here's the stress, and the stress is increasing, and my adaptation is also increasing. So at the same time, I'm actually getting better at doing it. But if the stress keeps going, it gets greater over a longer period of time, I no longer can meet the adaptive need. And now I'm starting to have damage occur. I can't meet the demands. Now the damage is occurring. And now I'm into this phase of it's actually not helping me. It's actually hurting me. And so we don't know exactly what that place is, right? And there's obviously a lot of mystery for some of us because, you look at the centenarians, people that live to be 100 years old, and they'll tell their story. And some of them are very clean and, perfect people in terms of what they eat and all that stuff. Other people, they drink whiskey and smoke cigarettes every day. And it's a mystery why some people have adapted in certain ways to certain things. But outside of that, if you just look at tobacco, what it is, when we smoke tobacco, we're actually taking in a very hot substance. There are tars, there are things that we know are carcinogenic, especially if it's tobacco that's not like from an organic, like natural source. It's something, there's all kinds of other things that are mixed in the tobacco, burn agents and things that increase the rate of the burn or slow it, depending on what it is. But there are other chemical compounds that also have damaging effects. So now you've got this idea that you're bringing in heat, you're bringing in smoke, and then you start to do it more frequently, right? Where you're doing it over time. The lungs, a very delicate tissue, gets faced with this smoke that then alters the tissue. The tissue responds by saying, okay, I need to adapt to this. And one of the things that happens is that we start to create these cells called goblet cells, and they're mucus producing cells that we have a few of inside the lung tissue around those alveoli. But as we get faced with more and more of this same kind of pressure, this smoke, this heat, this material, now we'll make more and more goblet cells start to show up where there normally are these simple squamous epithelial cells that are supposed to be there to absorb the oxygen, right? So we start to change the tissue that's there. And what happens is the damage that starts to occur, again, if it's more damage than we can adapt to, than we can protect ourselves from, we start to have damage into the lungs, and the lung tissue will start to break down. And the damage starts to occur at the level of the DNA, because we're trying to protect that recording of us, that perfect recording of me, so that I can replicate my lung tissue every time perfectly. But as there are more scratches on the recording replication process is altered, and now I have mutations that occur. And if you keep the pressure on over time, you'll create more mutations. So my advice to you, to this person, is to say, ideally, you wouldn't really smoke. I mean, I know your history. I know you've had cancer, so I know that you're doing great, and that's a wonderful thing. And absolutely, we all want to have a little bit of something good. We always wonder about coffee. We wonder about alcohol. We wonder about tobacco. We wonder about chocolate. So many things that we wonder, gosh, are these things okay? And the important thing is that most of the time, a little bit is okay if you really enjoy the thing that you're doing. And remember, when you take that thing in, how you think about that thing is really important. You want to be saying, this is my medicine, whatever it is. You don't want to be saying, this thing's probably bad for me, I'm probably going to hurt myself. That's not a good relationship. Relationship should be of a good one, of bringing it in and embracing and accepting, knowing that it's something that you're taking in intentionally and that it's going to be okay for you and good for you. It changes the relationship and what your body's able to do and how it relates. So what I would say is, it'd be better to just have, if you really feel like that nicotine thing is important for the work that you're doing, something, have a little bit. You could just have a couple of puffs of smoke, take it in. Most of the time for people, if they take it, the first couple of drags of smoke, the nicotine comes in, you've already flooded your system with nicotine. Beyond that point, you're not really getting much of that feeling of that anxiolytic effect of the tobacco, where it calms things down. You're not really getting a lot of the uplifting focus. You've gotten most of that pretty quickly. So everything that you're doing after that, every time you're taking in more smoke, you're actually, you're getting a depreciating return, and yet you're still causing the same amount of damage. So I would say try to make it much less than that. Limit your amount that you bring in, and don't do it as often. Give your body time to recover, especially if you're not doing it for a long period of time and then you take in 10 cigarettes a day. I wouldn't do that. I think that's a bad idea. I would say, enjoy, imagine more like the peace pipe idea, where you're taking in some really good tobacco, something that you think is as a prayer, you think of it as a sacrament, and you take in a little bit and you really take it in and enjoy it, and then you put it down and you work with that energy and you kind of do it that way. But I definitely think that 10 cigarettes a day for a week at a time, in intervals, has the capacity to be more, negative impact, more pressure than your body can quickly adapt to. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer to that question, but I think it's a good question, and it brings up a lot for me too, a bigger discussion. The third question I had here is concerning the PIK3 gene mutation, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about what that is. Is there any research on natural substances, alternatives to Kisqali, it's a drug that targets PIK3, to regulate it, being that it is the phosphatidylinositol pathway, and that the biggest supplement source of that is soy, likely contaminated with glyphosate? Might that be a factor in the mutation if one has used non-GMO lecithin for years? Thank you, and hope to see you soon. Well, I think that when we think about PIK3, most of us are familiar in the health world with the idea of mTOR, the mammalian target of rapamycin, which is this driver of growth. PIK3 is upstream from the nucleus. It's up into this. If the cell is here and then the receptors are out here, the receptor interaction with all the different growth factors and stimulants and inhibitory molecules and things that are signaling change what are called transcription cascades, transcription pathways inside the cell that then direct function at the nucleus. So something like PIK3 is a real hotspot. It's in the middle of a lot of different pathways and cascades that are getting driven when it gets activated. So it's kind of like this central driver of the activity in the nucleus to grow and make new things. And obviously with our body, we use this a lot in normal cells to create new growth and, to recover, et cetera. But when we look at it in terms of cancer, PIK3 is often one of those places that cancer will hijack in order to drive that growth and energy utilization pathway more readily. So targeting PIK3 is it's definitely something that we do a lot. And I have a whole list of PIK3 targeting substances that we have in natural medicine that are things that we have looked at in the data. We've, just looked at all the literature and gathered up all the different compounds that are PIK3 specific inhibiting. And I could, put that list up here somewhere. I have a list of herbs that inhibit PIK3, herb compounds that inhibit PIK3. I think the list as it is right now probably has maybe, 50 different nutrients or herbs in it, specific things that I consider to be, not only are they good as far as botanical medicines to use in the context of cancer, but these are things that have data also to support their use. Curcumin is a big one, from turmeric. I like to use the whole complex of turmeric with the curcumin in it, or combine some extra curcumin with the turmeric itself. Green tea, another big one of the big players. If you think about it, those are things that when we're talking about cancer, if you took like 3 of the biggest, most commonly thought of, cancer inhibitory molecules and compounds from botanical medicine, it would be the EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate from green tea. It would be the curcuminoids from turmeric, and it would be resveratrol from either grapeseed and skin or from the Polygonum cuspidatum, the tiger cane, one that's a Chinese herb, hujiang, which is one that's really powerful as far as clearing away toxicity. But those all those compounds have a lot of data, a number of studies, mostly done in animals and tissue studies initially, to show that they inhibit PIK3. There's a lot of other things. One other one that's really good, and this is another one of these big molecules that hits a lot of pathways, is thymoquinone, which comes from the black seed extract, or Nigella sativa, right? The black cumin seeds. That has a lot of good, cancer inhibitory effects as well. Other things like quercetin is a big one, right? A flavonoid that's found in a lot of different plants and foods, even like the skins of apples and onions. Sulforaphane and the glucosinolates that come from broccoli and cabbage, from all the cruciferous vegetables, especially in the seed, also from wasabi rhizome. Those things, those sulfur-rich molecules, those have a lot of powerful impact, also on PIK3. And then some of the herbs like Scutellaria bicalensis has another one. But anyway, I've got this long list, and I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested. If you want to know how to inhibit PIK3, if you have a cancer or someone who has identified the PIK3 gene mutation, I'm happy to share that with you and them to make sure that you can integrate those plants that have direct, literature to support their use in that context. Of course, you always want to use plants also as more directed at the constitution, at the symptom picture, what kind of treatments are people doing, and synergize with all of that. And then, add the layer of the data as well to make it more specific. So that was another question we had. Another one we had this morning was, my blood test showed I have 0 estrogen in my body. I am 69 years old, 70 in a few weeks, and very wrinkly, but have concerns since it is a hormone and I have had lung cancer. Should I do something about it, hormone replacement, or just leave it alone as I have for years? Well, the first part of that is that my blood tests show I have 0 estrogen. Well, blood tests aren't that sensitive. There's a detection limit, and most of the time it's around 10 in these tests. I think it might be nanograms per milliliter, but it would be you would see that your estrogen is undetectable with the instruments that are being used. So there's some estrogen in your body. It's just that it's very low and undetectable. And for women past, the age of menopause, when you get into the later years when there isn't a lot of estrogen available, remember that you're deriving all of your estrogen from testosterone. Testosterone is the source. It comes from cholesterol initially, and then that becomes pregnenolone, and then you get DHEA, you get testosterone, and then you get all these other androgens. But you also get, through the aromatase pathway, you get this manufacture of estrogens. And so it's probably likely, if this is the situation, that you have a hormone depletion on a bigger scale. And so we'd want to make sure and take a look at not just the estrogens, but how are you doing? How's your DHEA sulfate? That would be a really good marker to look at. And how are your androgens? How's your testosterone, your androstenedione, other molecules that are really important as signaling compounds that we release from our tissues to tell the body to rebuild itself. And, you mentioned wrinkles, and, I would imagine that goes with that is dryness, drying tissues. And as we dry out, as we age, we start to see these other, other effects. Like we get dry eyes, we get dry skin, we can have dry sexual organs, dryness in our vaginal tissues. We can have dryness in all kinds of areas, and it can be uncomfortable. It can, you can get less collagen. It can affect the way that our tissues are forming, and like you said, skin that starts to sag. So, should you do something about it? You've had lung cancer. Well, I think that making sure that you have some support is good. I don't often recommend people take exogenous estrogen or progesterone unless there's a specific reason to do that. Most of the time, we have the glands, we have the bone marrow, we have all the things that we need to make these hormones. So how do we support the body in doing that? That would be my first approach. The other thing would be that we can use plant compounds, things that are what we would call yin tonics, blood tonics, things that are like Rehmannia that grows under the ground, the yellow earth, it's a root that grows in there, the Shengdi, the raw one, or the Shu Di Huang, the very nourishing, it's a prepared form that gets really rich and it starts to build the marrow and the yin. It's a very moistening. You've got Shanyao, which is the Dioscorea, also very nourishing. And there's a lot of these plants that are in this class that will do this, Tianmendong, which is this wild asparagus tuber, the Opiopagon. There's a lot of them that will they're enriching and moistening and juicy, and they'll actually provide some of that, what we would call phytoestrogen effect, where they're giving you this push at those cell receptors to signal the body to rebuild and to make the tissues more alive. They're also very safe. The whole phytoestrogen conversation is one that is just really strange and blown out. There's no data showing that phytoestrogens in any plant cause cancer, that they drive cancer. All of the data on all the plants that I mentioned and all of these phytoestrogen rich plants, things like black cohosh or vitex, you name it, they're all going to be in the data that we have, which is, again, all animal studies, tissue studies, small observational studies. They all show that they actually have a net anti-cancer effect. So the thing is, we want to use these plants, nourish your tissues. If you have heat, if you have night sweats or hot flashes, dryness, we can use different plants to make it better, make it work more specifically for you. That's the place I would start. And then if you need some extra help, I like a plant called Pueraria mirifica. It's from Thailand. It's really good at helping to support these hormone levels. It'll, again, and sometimes you'll find that these plants don't necessarily increase your hormone levels. They'll help you be more efficient at receiving the hormone information. And they also will give your body some of the push that it wanted to get from the estrogens and progesterones that it didn't have. So it's not necessarily like we can build your estrogen stores, but we may, to some degree, over time, as we enhance function, working on your whole constitution. But this is the way that I would start, and I would take that approach because it'll actually have a benefit for you in preventing you from having a recurrence of cancer or from developing another cancer. And one last side note on that is that there is a clear connection between estrogen receptor activity and lung cancer. There are lots of lung cancers, different strains and different cell types within lung cancers that have estrogen receptor positivity. So it's a good question. As leukemia, et cetera, in which it would be best to avoid supplementing with melatonin. The MGUS is, it's what is it called? Monoclonal gammopathy of unknown significance, meaning your body's producing this gamma globulin, this protein that's being produced, and it's being picked up in the blood. You can check it out. The gamma protein is a part of the diagnosis of multiple myeloma, but also in this MGUS, there's this, this material that's being made. It gums up the kidneys. It causes kidney problems and kidney damage. But the question being, with any of these sort of blood cancers, is melatonin indicated, or is it a problem? And I'll say that, with melatonin, I don't know about its immune suppressing effects. I'm not sure that that's really a thing. Melatonin is obviously, it's a pineal gland time rhythm molecule, and it's a hormone that we make in the body that's associated with our diurnal rhythm. And it does have a number of effects. A lot of people today, with all the stimulation that's going on, do find that melatonin is helpful for sleep, helping keeping them more restful at night. Again, it is a hormone, and so we're changing feedback relationships in our body when we're applying a hormone to the body. So in general, again, if you have the gland, I like to have people, alter the function of the whole system so that it works better, and that we can produce melatonin in a way that's effective and more in concert with the body. Interestingly, people with cancer today are bringing the question up to me oftentimes, like, can I use big doses of melatonin? People are showing in small studies and in, clinical practice that you can take, 300, 500, 1,000 milligrams of melatonin daily and have a really powerful anti-cancer effect. Well, that's a huge dose, extremely, beyond the physiological range of dosing for, for any natural production in our bodies. So we start to get into this realm of, well, what is it really doing? And we found that the studies on safety show that even at the dose of 1,000 milligrams for a month, people didn't have any like negative health effects that were detectable, at least looking at their blood or their symptoms, which is interesting. That's a big, big dose. What is it doing? We're not really sure. And I don't know, again, if that's something that I would want to do in a case of multiple myeloma, in a case of leukemia. The data isn't really strong. I don't know if there have been cases where we've shown that melatonin, increased the output of leukemic cells or this paraprotein. It's definitely a question, and it's something that I think we're going to continue to dig in on and wonder about in the times to come. I think I can probably guess who asked this question. I could probably just go to this person and see if you would want to come in. I could unmute you. I think this is Steve, and see. Let's see, is Steve still here? Maybe he's not here now. There he is. Hey, Steve, there you are. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see if I can do that.
Okay, I unmuted myself.
Oh, great. Hi, Steve.
Yeah, hi. Pardon my blue blocker glasses here.
No problem.
Yes, that's totally correct. I did ask that question. I think I mentioned to you previously about Pam Smith's book about maximizing your male hormones. Now, she's the second one who has stated about not using melatonin for those blood issues that we just talking about. And Dr. Neil McKinney was the first one. So that's two now that, have stated the same caution. So that's why I'm bringing it up here.
Yeah, and I think the key, I think that's really a wise place to come from. I think we want to be cautious. A lot of the data with melanoma and a lot of the popularity was around the role of melanoma in helping with the effect of chemotherapy, right? That's been a lot of the positive information around the use of melatonin in cancer. And that's where a lot of the, kind of oncological naturopathic information has been. It's been around how do we use melatonin as a way to enhance chemotherapy efficacy and reduce side effects. And it seems to do really well in that context. It's interesting, you can look at vitamin D as well, which in granulomatosis and diseases that have, like leukemia, lymphoma, if you give people high doses of vitamin D, you can also really do the opposite thing that you want to do. You can actually cause problems in sarcoid type of conditions where you can actually create more scarring and more problems. So you want to make sure you're following vitamin D levels. Again, it's like there's no one thing that you just take this thing when you have cancer. Okay, you got cancer, let's take melatonin. It's going to be great for you. We don't want to do that. We want to make, that Sherlock Holmes kind of perspective. It's like, what is going on with this person, and how would melatonin interact with their body? Do they need it or do they not need it? How does it help them? How would it not help them? What other treatments are they doing, et cetera? So, I don't think there's an answer to that question at this point, Steve, but I like your approach. I think caution. I think I wouldn't do super physiological doses of melatonin.
Okay, so it comes down apparently to anything that's immune stimulatory might be bad for the blood cancers. Where, I mean, there are so many things that are immune stimulatory. I think having a list of those items, the supplements, perhaps food, whatever, might also be beneficial, right? If something is extremely immune stimulatory.
Yeah, well, I mean, an example of a plant that actually has some immune stimulatory actions is echinacea. And echinacea is really a standout one. Oftentimes the mushrooms get categorized into this immune stimulatory category, but they're not. They're actually immune modulatory, and they help the body adapt to different types of immunological pressures. And this has been shown out in all kinds of things. Autoimmune diseases being a great example, where it doesn't push the autoimmunity. But echinacea would go into that category for me. There's such an enhancement of natural killer activity with echinacea that it's even contraindicated in the herbal medicine realm within the first trimester of pregnancy, because it can actually trigger an immune response against the fetus if the dose is high enough. So I think, again, we want to find things that are going to be immune modulatory. They're going to be regulating immune function, helping your body do what it needs to do. But like you said, these are cells of the immune system that have been mutated and have become the cancerous cells. And so anything that would be pushing them to do their thing would be pushing the cancer.
You may recall, I had a previous situation like this with Andrographis, and I was actually validating that. Remember that woman blogger, smoldering myeloma blogger?
Yeah.
Her name was Margaret. She's the one who discovered this, that Andrographis was causing her smoldering to kind of blow up. And I actually tried it on myself just to try it. And sure enough, I experienced the same thing. So Andrographis must have the same immune stimulatory effects in that way.
Or it could be more specific, because Andrographis is really, I mean, from a traditional perspective, it's a really strong anti-heat toxin herb. It clears, damp heat. It's extremely bitter. And so it has this real, just gets rid of viruses. It's very antiviral in its actions. It's not considered to be like an immune stimulant. It's more of a clearing herb, whereas something like echinacea is really a tonic. And a lot of herbs like astragalus is a tonic. And so sometimes you tonify something, you can actually tonify a pathogen. And it's true of all kinds of different pathogens, that whatever they be, if you tonify them too much, you can actually create an excess condition in the pathogen, which is the opposite of what we want to be doing. So understanding what the excess and deficiency relationship is at a principle level is, again, one of those reasons why I always hold to the principles of this Taoist approach to medicine, as well as the microscopic, analytical side of it. So, but, and again, with a specific herb in a specific case, it might do something there that it didn't do somewhere else. And that's the kind of stuff that we have to be aware of also.
Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, thank you for answering my question.
Oh, you're so welcome, Steve. Thanks for being here. You always have great questions. I really appreciate it. I love your mind and the way you think about things.
Right, thank you.
Cool. So we had also, I know that someone else here, Michelle, I think you were asking about cannabis, and I'm going to wonder if you're talking about just here. Maybe I can actually just see if you want to clarify that for me, Michelle. I don't want to put you on the spot. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but if you wanted to unmute yourself and just clarify your question. I know you're a PhD and very astute, and we could ask a little bit more specific question about marijuana.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I was asking about smoking marijuana periodically. I find that it is very relaxing, but then I think about, well, what potential harm is there in terms of your lungs? And I remember Andrew Weil's quote about he had written a book about marijuana, or he was reviewing a book on marijuana, and he was talking about how beneficial it was. Now, I don't know if he was speaking about smoking it or ingesting it, But I'm curious in terms of smoking a little bit of it in the evening, you know, a couple of puffs. Is that something that you feel is not too detrimental or possibly has some good potential?
Well, again, this is another one of these ones where and I'll just preface this answer with the knowledge that I spend a lot of time working on this question of cannabis in cancer, especially, and there are a lot of folks out there who are earnestly and diligently looking for solutions within the kind of treasure trove of cannabis as a generator of molecular information. And the cannabinoids, right, which is this field of study that we've been digging into, and then all the terpenes and the flavonoids that come inside that plant also, they create a whole different sort of effect on what we call the endocannabinoid receptor system. And we obviously make cannabinoids in our body, and so we're familiar with them and we work with them, and this plant is very close to us and we've been working with it for a long time. So there's obviously some really intimate relationships there. And some folks have been, kind of the opinion that, cannabis can cure cancer. And I'll just say that where we are with it right now, it's not that kind of a thing. We don't want to rely on cannabis to cure cancer. I've seen a lot of people try that and be unsuccessful, and I don't ever recommend that. I think it's a wonderful herb. It has really some amazing properties and things that separate it from a lot of other plants. But we don't know enough about it yet to be guiding, kind of treatment with patients as far as their cancers go. I would say that in the context of what you're talking about, which would be sort of more casual, recreational, or even kind of mild medicinal use of cannabis as a way to, like you said, calm the nervous system, right? And for some people, cannabis can be really calming, and for other people it can be really anxious. It can make you anxious. It can be anxiety inducing. People oftentimes get more of a rapid heart rate. You start like a little self-doubt and kind of questioning stuff. So it's sort of like, what is it doing to you, and is it feeling good? Is it helping you rest? Is it helping you calm down and relax? And if it's doing that and you think of it as medicine and it feels really good, and you're only smoking it or vaporizing it in small amounts, you're not hurting yourself, then that's probably good for you. All the data that we have, I mean, the stuff that looked at marijuana use and, smoking it even with different kinds of cancers showed that in general, it was beneficial for people. It didn't promote cancer, but it didn't do a whole lot either. It wasn't like it cured the cancer. So it could be one part of a whole, regimen that you're doing for yourself to keep yourself more calm or relaxed, and it having some basic sort of cancer inhibitory effects. And coming back to the nervous system, one of the places that I've focused a lot on is this role of stress and the sympathetic nervous system as a main driver of cancer growth, and how cancers have now actually been shown to hijack those sympathetic nerve endings and build around them, so that sympathetic fight or flight stress response actually drives cancer to grow. So if you're shutting that down, that's really good. It's going to be helpful. And again, different cannabinoids, combinations, right? There's some, we always think about indica and sativa. You could think of it more in terms of cannabinoids that are, we would say, calming or relaxing. Cannabinoid, more like the THC side of things versus CBD. A combination of the two is generally better. High THC with certain terpenes has different effects, right? So if you take a THC-rich plant that then has a lot of myrcene and a lot of linalool, those terpenes, it becomes really calming, like the kind of couch lock. People just get like, oh, I just like, don't want to do anything. I'm not really thinking about it. It can be like that. Whereas there's another side of it where there's things like pinene and limonene and beta-caryophyllene and other compounds as terpenes that actually give it more of an uplifting effect. So there's these different types of, like, the indica, the sativa, the kind of morning versus the nighttime. So it's not just like cannabis itself. It's really which type of cannabis, what type of application, what kind of administration, when do you use it, how to use it, and why, that all comes into the picture for me. And so again, there's not one simple answer. And the most important message that I want to get out is that the cannabis itself is not like this amazing cancer cure. I don't want that idea to be, taken the wrong way, and someone says, oh, I'm going to cure my cancer, with cannabis, and then not do other things that might have a much better, more curative effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not thinking of it as inhibiting cancer in any way. It's more, I find that maybe a half an hour before bed, if I smoke a little bit, that it's very calming and relaxing and helps me to go to sleep. I had actually I went to the marijuana store and I got a tincture that was predominantly THC with a little bit of CBD. The problem, which I realized, is it has like a little sugar in it, and I'm intermittent fasting. So I don't know if that little bit of sugar screws up the intermittent fasting, which made me feel like, well, maybe I should go back to smoking it. And, I'm just talking about a small amount. But then during COVID, I worried about lungs that, initially the wild strain was impacting lungs. And I felt, well, I don't want to compromise my lungs in case I were to get COVID. So I was reluctant to smoke. So it sounds like as long as it's calming, as long as I'm not doing a lot of it, it certainly shouldn't be a problem for me. So thank you for responding to the question.
I think you're welcome. I think it's a really good question. And it's one I think that is important for people. We don't need to say, oh gosh, marijuana is bad, it's terrible, that kind of thing. Not at all. It's an herb, it's a medicine, and it has its place, and it has an appropriate time to use it, and it has not appropriate times to use it. I'll say that it's been wonderful to see what vaporized cannabis has done with a lot of cancer patients who are undergoing nausea and loss of appetite. It's really remarkable how well it can work in those realms.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and no sugar in your intermittent fasting times. Yes, definitely. Yeah, don't take yourself out of that mild ketosis that happens with intermittent fasting.
Okay.
Great. I saw that, Jack, you had put up a little little thing just about like kind of talking about the cigarettes and the degradation of the DNA and all of that, and sort of the the relationship of the depletion of the yin and estrogen, and just kind of when we think about the basic yin and yang concept, that yang is, again, outward, it's hot, it's activity, and it's very stimulating in its action, whereas the yin, this is very general, would be more consolidating, more cooling, more settling, and more nourishing, more moist, and it's basically giving everything this sense that it's wet and juicy. And so when you have the heat over time, it depletes the yin, and the yin being depleted leads to this manifestation of symptoms. And estrogen is one manifestation of a yin molecule, of a yin substance, that helps to create more of a yin nourished environment. So I'll just kind of give that as a little taster on how deep that can go and how fun it can be to dig into that. There's one more question in that realm that came in too. Have I used progesterone cream as a 5-ARI, a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor? And the answer to that is no, I haven't. And I think you said 5-ARI. I wasn't sure if you meant an aromatase inhibitor, but as a 5-ARI, 5-alpha reductase is the enzyme that converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone. Aromatase is the enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. And it may be progesterone cream may have some effect as inhibiting that conversion, but I don't think a whole lot. I wouldn't use it that way, and I haven't used it that way. We have a lot of other aromatase inhibitors that are good things to use. So and I have lists of those as well.
I did mean alpha reductase. Actually,
what's that?
I did mean alpha reductase inhibitor.
Oh, you did? Okay. So
yes.
And I don't know in that regard either. I know, with androgen type of related cancers, like prostate cancer, progesterone has a different sort of pathway that, and you can go from progesterone into estrogens, right? They can become estrogens. I always keep my little, this little list here. You can go from 17-hydroxyprogesterone over to androstenedione, which then becomes all the estrogens. So I don't, again, I'm not sure that's really a way to go, because androstenedione can also become testosterone, and it can go down the same pathway, 5-alpha reductase. So I wouldn't do it that way, because it's so up in the metabolism of hormones that it can become another feeding molecule to a disrupted pathway. So unless you, and if you have some data to share on that, that's great. I don't know what it is. It doesn't make sense to me, but it may be that it works in some other way. Okay, well, everyone, that is the end of our first hour. I want to say thanks so much to everyone for being here, and thank you, Jack, for being here and helping to host this. I want to make sure that, you know, we all know that this is available every month, and I'm going to be doing it, and there's going to be lots of room for questions. I encourage you to think of them ahead of time and get us thinking about them, and let's get the conversation going. Don't forget to look into the membership. We've got a lot of other wonderful offerings that we have now. I'm going to be doing more recordings with Jack and just kind of getting more information out there, more, you know, more storytelling for you all too, to try to help us all make sense of this interesting, you know, situation we're in with life in this world today and all the health issues we have. Okay, until the next time, may you all have a blessed week and month ahead. Many blessings.